Hello and welcome to our STEM Careers All Year virtual reading event. My name is Jenna Grubman. I'm with First Book, and I'm so excited to welcome all of you students and educators from around the country to our event today. Please use the chat function to share where you're tuning in from, your city, your school name, even your grade level if you'd like. We just want to see everyone from Texas, Ohio, Oregon. Thank you. So keep sharing that if you haven't already. So we are going to begin in just a minute. Again, just to give you a little lay of the land, we've got our lovely chat box. But then we also have next to it our questions and answers. So if you click on that tab a little later in the presentation, that's where we'd love for you to share any questions you have for our speakers. So we'll get to that a little bit later in the presentation. But again, for now, please send in where you're tuning in from in the chat box. All right. So, we are going to get started. Again, my name is Jenna Grubman. I'm with First Book, and we are so proud to have a partner like General Motors, or GM, for this great series that we're now in our second year of, the STEM Careers All Year. And I'm going to introduce my colleague, Sammy Sugiyama from GM in just a minute. To share a little bit more about our partnership together. But again, thank you all for joining. This STEM Careers All Year series really is a look at what diversity in STEM looks like, from the books that I read today, the folks that work at GM and the careers they have, and really to emphasize how we can all find our identity through STEM and through books. Again, this is made possible from General Motors, and we're so excited about today's session because we're welcoming two fantastic storytellers, both who have a great story about themselves and one that they tell through the work that they do. So we'll get to Carsen and Pablo in just a few minutes. So stay tuned for both of them. And the great thing today too is Pablo's going to be sharing a little bit from his book, The Last Beekeeper. So we'll have all that. So now I'd like to pass it to my friend, Sammy Sugiyama from General Motors, who she is the grant making manager there. And then I just want to plug one more time that after Pablo has read a few excerpts from his book and shared a little bit more, we are going to do some questions and answers. So please use that Q&A box to share any questions from your students. All right, let me turn it over to Sammy.
Thank you, Jenna. Like Jenna mentioned, my name is Samantha Sugiyama, and I work in General Motors Corporate Giving Department, which means that I am very lucky to have the very special job of working with really great nonprofit organizations like First Book. For some background, here at GM, we're working towards becoming the most inclusive company in the world. And we know that in order to do that, we have a responsibility to make STEM education more accessible and more equitable. With this in mind, each month, GM partners with First Book to put on these virtual STEM Career All Year events where students and teachers can hear from GM employees of all different backgrounds about their STEM journey and listen to stories that feature diverse STEM characters. If you've watched these sessions before, welcome back. We're really glad to have you. And if this is your first time streaming in, thank you so much for joining us. You're really in for a special treat today. We are so excited to have our very special guest speakers here with us. Feel free to comment in the chat if you've joined us before, and if you have, what books you've read with us in the past, or if this is your first time joining us. And then remember to join us again next month. And as Jenna mentioned, Carsen and Pablo will be taking questions after the reading, but feel free to start submitting those at any time. And again, make sure that you're putting them in the Q&A section. If you drop those in the chat, we might miss them. So be sure to use that Q&A section there. And with that, I would like to introduce you to my colleague. Carsen serves as the Senior Manager of Sustainability Communications here at GM, where she provides strategic support to our Chief Sustainability Officer and works with all different departments across our organization to develop engagement strategies for GM's sustainability initiatives and helps to tell GM's sustainability story. So with that, please join me in welcoming Carsen.
Hi, everyone. So amazing to be here with you all today. I'm so excited to meet you, or to meet you virtually, and for you to see me and to join us for this really special experience. I know Pablo is going to do an awesome job reading through his book. I'm really excited for that part. But thank you, Sammy and Jenna, for the introduction, and thank you for having me here today. My name is Carsen, and like Sammy said, I work with her at General Motors, and I really work very closely with our Office of Sustainability, and I help support our Chief Sustainability Officer, who is really out there in the world telling GM's sustainability story. You may know us through our vehicles that we make. We have brands like Chevy and Cadillac and Buick and GMC. So if you see one of those cars on the road, maybe you'll think about us and think about this session. But you might also know that General Motors is actually transitioning from gas-powered vehicles to making only electric vehicles. Decade or so, we're going to be making that transition. And that amazing work is something that I get to support every day in my career and at my time at GM. So just a little bit about me. I actually saw in the chat we have some people from Jersey. I was born and raised in Jersey City. I think I saw Jersey City come up on the chat, so shout out to you there. As you can see on the slide, these three pictures really represent me. I'm an athlete. I'm super close to my family, and we have a dog. I call him a puppy, but he's 4 years old. His name is Champ. He's our best friend, and he's my puppy son. I like to refer to him as. This picture here, you see me doing some Olympic weightlifting. I really love weightlifting and going to the gym. I have a lot of fun with my friends there. I did play volleyball in college. I went to North Carolina State University for my freshman year, and then I transferred to Fairfield University in Connecticut. So spent some time in the South, spent some time on the East Coast where I was born and raised. And then random fact, I also actually lived in Honolulu, Hawaii. So I'm not sure, it's pretty early in Hawaii. I'm not sure if we have anybody from Hawaii joining us, but I went to high school there. I played volleyball there, went to Honolulu High School, and absolutely loved my time there, as anyone would. So today I feel like what really brings me here is my career in sustainability. And as you heard from Sammy, I'm really more on the communication side. So my connection to STEM and the folks that really are, our scientists or engineers or mathematicians at the company, I help them communicate their very amazing and important work to the rest of the world. Because really, if you're not living in that technical space and that's not your job, or maybe something that you're comfortable talking about and understanding, you need a communicator to come in and kind of help bridge that gap and help these folks, these experts, talk about their work so that more people can understand how they're helping to create a more sustainable world and really to help fight climate change. So that's just a little bit of background about me. If you have any fun questions for me later, I'm happy to answer them. I can tell you more about Champ or more about weightlifting. But that's a little bit about me, and I'm so excited to be here with you all, and can't wait to hear from Pablo, who I think is coming up next. But I think first I'll turn it back over to Jenna.
Thanks, Carsen. Yeah, well, I also love pictures of dogs and weightlifting, so fit right in there with you. But I wish I would have spent my high school years in Hawaii too. Well, thank you, Carsen, and we are so excited to hear more about your interest in STEM, how you got to where you are today. As you and Pablo talk to each other a little bit later, Sammy has some great questions for you to get us started as we get to that part of the session. But I do want to take now a moment to introduce Pablo Cartaya, who is an award-winning author, screenwriter, speaker, and occasional actor. I'll let him share a little bit about that. And so he is a Pura Belpré Honor Book Award winner for his book, The Epic Fail for Arturo Zamora, and Indie Audie finalist for Audiobook of the Year in the middle grade category. He also narrated that. He's done a lot in his work, and he is currently a lead faculty at Sierra Nevada University's MFA program and is working on future television and film adaptations, as well as a few more original stories. He lives in the hyphens between his Cuban and American identities with his familia in Miami. And I'm really excited that he's here, and he's going to share a little bit about his book, The Last Beekeeper. Just a kind of hot off the presses that this book was just named a finalist for the Jane Addams Children's Book Award. This award is presented annually and has been since 1953, and it's given to a children's book that advances the causes of peace and social equality. So congratulations, Pablo. We can't wait to hear about the book and about you. So before I turn it right over, just want to remind everybody one more time that we do have the lovely chat box. And then after Pablo shares a little bit about himself, his STEM identity, and The Last Beekeeper, we'll get to that Q&A. So get your questions ready for Carsen, for Pablo, and then anything that just comes into your head. All right, Pablo, welcome.
All right. Hola, buenas tardes, buenos dias, good morning, everyone. Calling all the way from California. I see Catherine, Megan Mann from Indiana, Stacy Richard from Massachusetts, Rebecca Anson from Oregon, Nadia Valenzuela, greetings from New Mexico. Oh my goodness, there are so many people, so many wonderful educators and students all over the country talking about and listening in about STEM, but I will say STEAM in just a minute, and I'll tell you why. But STEM, and tuning in to listen to me and to listen to Carsen talking about the importance of STEM in our lives. My name is Pablo Cartaya, and I'm an author. I've written some books, as you can see back here in the background, and I write, I've written some television shows, and I've been an actor. I was on a show called Will and Grace. I was in a music video with Beyonce back in the day when she was a Destiny's Child. But anyway, we won't talk about that. Let's talk about why I wrote the book that I wrote, The Last Beekeeper. Well, before we start there, I want to talk a little bit, and I want to give a shout out to Carsen for talking about something that is very important in the books, the types of books that I write, and that's community. And that's family, and that's culture. For me, those are the three most important things that make up the body of my work: family, community, and culture. And they really represent everything that I think we should all be thinking about. We should be thinking about our communities. We should be thinking about our families and our cultures and how they intersect and how they get together and how we can all share our own individual stories with each other. You know, this book, The Last Beekeeper, it was an interesting choice for me to write a dystopian novel. Y'all know what dystopian means? It's like, basically, it's supposed to be a perfect world, but it's not. It turns out really bad and really terrible. And this book, dystopian novels are usually set in the future. So if you think like The Hunger Games, or you think like any of those like stories that like everything is pretty bad, well, I decided to write a book set 125 years in the future, and there are no more bees on Earth. Now, if you know any of my other work, this is a bit of a stretch for me. This is not something that I was normally doing. I usually write like contemporary, realistic fiction. There's some humor in it. There's some heart. So what got me to write a book like this? You know, I really started thinking about this story when it was around, I would say, I don't know if you remember that time. I don't know if anybody's in here from Texas, but there was a freeze that happened across the state of Texas, and all communication went out. Like it was wild to me that all the communication. Can you imagine if if you weren't allowed to get on TikTok, to get on your cell phones, if you weren't allowed to use your phones at all, and there was no way to communicate with anybody? Well, this happened in the state of Texas not too long ago, and I started thinking about, like, wow, this is something really interesting that Mother Nature decided I'm gonna put a freeze across an entire state, and all communication is gonna be done. And then I started thinking, you know, the only thing that is undefeated in the history of our world is Mother Nature. She has not lost. And I started thinking about the environment, and I started thinking about the effects of the environment, and what we're doing to the environment as a human race, and how we're affecting the world that we're living in. And so I had an idea of setting a book, like what happens in the future if, like, the environment has just basically, Mother Nature has had her way with everybody, right? And I thought, okay, I'm going to write this book. And I got it sold. I got the idea sold because I wanted to make these two sisters, these two hermanas, right? And they had an abuela who was a climate scientist, because I always have abuelas in my books. If you all don't know what an abuela is, it's a grandma. I love my grandma. I love my abuelita, and I put her in everything. So in this book, their abuela, the two sisters, Yolanda and Camila. That's another thing I always put. I always put Latinx names in my books, like Yolanda, Camila, Emilia, everybody. That's how I represent my culture, right? Community, family, culture, and all that, right? Anyway, so I went and I was thinking about, okay, so I have this climate scientist abuela, and she's no longer there, but she writes this, she writes a book, and there's these two sisters are living alone, and they're living in a world, and it's very bleak, and it's dark, and the nature has ravaged the entire, but, like, what's this story about? And I signed the contract for this book February of 2020. And then March 15th of 2020, everything shuts down. And I had 3 months to write the first draft of this book that I had sold to HarperCollins. And I had 3 months. I had to turn it in like at the end of July. And everything shut down, and I suddenly lost all the inspiration. I lost all the inspiration to write. I was worried. I was worried for my family. I was worried for my dad. My dad's much older, and I was just kind of really just nervous about everything. And I saw that the world was just kind of just like turning on its head, and I just couldn't get myself to writing. And what I ended up doing was just learning how to bake, and just like learning I don't know if, like, during the pandemic you all like learned random skills, but that's what I just learned random skills, like how to bake and stuff, and I just couldn't get myself to writing the story, and I couldn't start it. We left because I live in Miami, like I told you, and we left because it was hot and we couldn't go anywhere, and we just packed our bags and we went up to Vermont, where where I have family up there, and we rented a house in Vermont. And we stayed there for a few months, and it was there that I had to get this book done, and I still didn't have a hook. I didn't know what the book was about. I knew it was about the future and the environment, and everything had taken over, and I just didn't know what it was about until one day I was sitting outside. I had my laptop up, and I started typing, and I was like, I don't know. And I hear a bzzz like this. And I spot. I don't know if y'all ever seen a bee, like when they come up. I don't know what you do, but like my first instinct was just to go like to do that, right? I don't know if y'all have done that, like they tell you like blow and just it'll kind of go away. And I started blowing, and the bee kind of just like sort of fluttered away, and then it sort of came back, and I start writing, and I hear bzz right behind my ear. And I don't know if you've ever heard like that little thing when you get something on your neck, and you get like like that. What I did was I went like this, and I smacked that bee dead, and the little bee just fell right in front. It didn't even get to sting me. And something came. I felt like so bad, because I had a general idea of what pollinators were, and I had a general idea, okay, bees, some bees make honey, some bees this and that, but I didn't really know. And I started researching. And as I started researching, I realized that bees are the epitome of community. They build together, and they are responsible for over 70% of our food. And as I researched, I realized that's where I have my story. That's where I have my story. I'm going to write about the last bee colony on Earth that these two sisters find in this dystopian world. And of course, I added augmented humans, I added drones, I added all kinds of technology and all this. But at its heart, this is a story about how two sisters discover the last bee colony on Earth and help their community survive. So I'm going to read a couple of excerpts from it so that you can kind of get a flavor of what it is, right? And then I'm going to turn it back over to Jenna, and then we're going to answer some questions, all right? So I'm gonna read. I always like reading a little bit of the first chapter just so that you can kind of get a feel for the tone of the book. The book isn't really that funny, but it's got a lot of like page turning moments, but at its heart, I want, if you get around to reading this book, at its heart, I want you to always think about that this is a story about community, about family, and about fighting for what's right. And I think that STEM, and I want to add another letter to that. I think STEM is something that we can approach with that mindset. And the letter that I want to add is an A, STEAM. I'm going to put an A, if I may, because the A represents art. And I think that art, like a book that you write, or a painting that you draw, or a poem that you create, I think that can affect the way that we view science and technology, and how we help continue to build and protect our communities and our environment. I will take it now, leave it over to Jenna, so that Carsen and we can answer some questions and all that stuff.
Thank you. That was so exciting. I think that I am going to run out to the library and finish reading for myself, and I think that we have quite a few teachers and students who would agree with that. And it looks like from the chat, a lot of kiddos are ready to run out and finish reading what you started for us. So with that, we're going to kick off the Q&A. And if you all want to continue putting your questions in the Q&A for Pablo, for Carsen, for myself, whatever you have, we are ready to answer. So I will start us off with one for Pablo. Well, you kind of already went into it about what inspired you to write The Last Beekeeper. I think we covered that one, actually. So I'm going to skip right to Carsen. What inspired you to get involved in sustainability?
Well, first of all, just have to snaps, claps for Pablo. That was amazing. I'm ready to go to Barnes and Noble's like right after I get off of this. Amazing. And I think it feels very meant to be, Pablo, because so much of what you were saying about culture and representing and expressing that through your writing is something that I relate to so much. So Sammy, actually, to answer your question, I would say it's my Lola, my grandma. So I am Filipino American, and in Tagalog, that's the native language, grandma is Lola. So my Lola, I grew up very much in her household, and she took care of me all the time when my parents were out at work. And I would say, and I answered this question on another, panel that I did a few weeks ago, like what inspired you to get into this space? And it was my Lola. I always grew up understanding because of her that I had an impact on the household. And essentially, I think without knowing that I had this understanding, I had an impact on the world. She would always say, are we making too much food? Are we going to eat this all? Or is it going to go to waste? Can we save this? Can we eat it for leftovers? She would always ask, can we recycle this? Are we throwing it in the right bin? My Lala was always very conscious and aware of sort of that impact that we had on each other, and especially on the whole household and how it functioned as our place that we lived and that we played. So I always attribute sort of my overall inspiration to my grandma, and I think without knowing it, those questions have really stayed with me in my own household as I've built, as we're, building our family here in New Jersey. I always think about my impact and how we can reduce and reuse. And obviously that translates to the, career path that I chose. So very much in line with everything that Pablo mentioned with family. And I think I'm right there with you. I'm very inspired by the folks that I grew up around and just thinking about sustainability. And I don't think we ever called it sustainability quite yet. I don't think my grandma was in the know about the terms back then, but she really, always drove home that we have to be conscious of our impact. And that has stuck with me my whole life.
That's awesome. That's amazing. And I have to say too that when I think about the field that I went into and philanthropy and giving back, I definitely think about my grandma, my bachan, and she was in the same way. She was very conscientious about, giving back and doing good, and really instilled that in my sister and I. And so she played such a big part in molding me and my career and my future. So I just so appreciate that we all come from different backgrounds, but share that similarity and share that commonality. That's such a special thing. So thank you both for sharing that. That's awesome. I think our next question here is for Pablo. How many books have you written, and how long does it take you to write a book?
Okay. Well, I've written, like books that are out right now, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7 books, 2 episodes of a TV show, 2 screenplays, and 4 more books that I just wrote this year that are coming out in the next 3 years. So, I'm in that hustle. I'm in that hustle writing, everybody asks like, oh, why do you write? I was like, to pay my mortgage. That's why I write. No, I'm just kidding. So I love answering this question. Like, how long does it take me to write a book? Because I think it's important for students to understand, like, I feel very privileged to do what I love to do, and I can, I can live off of just writing the stories that I write and do this job. This is my job. And I feel very privileged to do that. However, I really think it's important to understand for the students out there, like this was like technically my, like the debut middle grade book, young adult book that I wrote, The Epic Fail of Arturo Zamora. And this book took me, and if we were in person, and if I was asking like, the young people in person, I'd be like, all right, how many years do you think it took me to write this book? So you can hear me in your classrooms. You can shout out like how many years you think all over the country. And I will tell you, I'll give you 2 seconds to yell it out. How many years do you think it took me to write this book? And now I'm going to answer 5 years. It took 5 years to write this first book. All right. You know how, and I'm talking to the students again, you know how when you write something and you turn it in, and then your teacher comes back and she marks it all up, or he marks it all up, or they mark it all up, and they're like, and they give it back to you. And you're like, what do you mean it wasn't perfect? And then you're kind of like, I have to revise this. I have to rewrite this. What do you mean? How many of you, raise your hand, how many of you really love to revise? Okay, I can't see you, but I feel you. I don't like to revise. Okay, I do not like to revise, but I understand that revision is important because it gets the story just a little bit better. So how many revisions of this book do you think I did? So shout out the answers across the country. We could hear them everywhere. I can hear 15, 10, 50. I know one kid's going to say 100. I know one kid's going to say 1,000. I know one kid's going to say 1. All right, 23 times. 23 times I revised this book. This book was originally 300 pages. All right, it's a little under that now, but it was originally 300 pages. So I revised this book 23 times. It took me 5 years. Now, it was originally 300 pages. Let's do a little math, right? Because STEM is part of math. You got to think about some math and STEM. I get terrified when I have to think about math, but we won't get into that. 23, right? To the students across America listening in right now, 23 times 300. Don't use your calculator. What is 23 times 300? All right. I know there's a whole bunch of you that are answering the correct questions. So let me just say the correct answer is 6,900. So I want you to put in your heads, I wrote approximately 6,900 pages, 5 years, 23 drafts to write this one book. But guess what? I got a shiny little sticker for it. And this book, when it came out, was considered one of the best books of its class in the entire country. It was a finalist for the Sakura Medal in Japan. I read this book to all the middle schoolers in the country of Sweden. It was a finalist for the Canadian Book Award. It was a Pura Belpre honor book. It's on over 40 state award lists, book award lists. So those are all wonderful things, and it launched my career. But I want you all to know that 5 years, 23 drafts, 6,900 pages is a lot of the times what it takes, and if we're talking about sustainability, if we're talking about being, like being active in how we're engaging with our community and the environment, it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of work. It's not saying that we want to do it. It's not saying I want to write a book. It's not saying I want to take care of my planet. It's doing it and then redoing it and then doing it again and then doing it again and again and again and again, right? Until finally we achieve what we want to achieve. So that's my long-winded answer of that.
That's amazing, and that is some serious dedication. And I think it actually leads really well into another question that we have. So Pablo, you can start us off, and then Carsen, if you want to jump in after, of how do you conquer fear of failure? And when you make a mistake, what do you do to not give up? So in the 5,000th draft change edit you were doing, what kept you going and how did you not give up?
I'll give you one. My belief in myself is greater than my self-doubt. And there's another way to say that. Some people say, like, my belief in myself is greater than your doubt. But I think that sometimes what happens is that we doubt ourselves. And so we become afraid to fail. But I believe in myself more than I doubt myself. And I know that all of us have had feelings where, like, you don't want to do something, or you're afraid to do something because you're worried that failing is going to, like, be catastrophic. It could be really bad. And I promise you that you should never be afraid to fail. You should never be afraid to fail because in failure is how you learn how to not fail that way the next time, right? And just, you keep getting back up. I mean, to borrow a term from basketball, because I'm a big basketball fan, and I want you all across the country to start rooting for the Miami Heat on my behalf. Thank you. And my favorite player was Dwayne Wade, and Dwayne Wade, he's retired now, but Dwayne Wade said, I fall down 9 times and I get up 10. You keep falling. If you fall down, you just keep getting back up. You fall down, you keep getting back up. And I think that we have to know that it's okay to fail. It's all right to mess up. We just got to keep going. You know, how, I mean, just think about science, right? Like if we're thinking about science, like let's talk about GM, right? Is the if anything that GM engineers, it's not the first thing that they engineer that makes it through, right? It's you fail a couple of times, often thousands of times before you get it right. I wrote a book that took a long time to write, but I kept going because my belief in myself is greater than my self-doubt. Carsen, what are your thoughts on that?
That's a hard, I mean, you took the words right out of my mouth. I don't know that I can add much more to that. Such good advice, Pablo, and I totally relate. Something along similar lines that I heard from someone recently, and it was actually at work about presenting a project. And so, just so, you students are aware, even as adults and you're in a career that you love and you're doing something that you really enjoy, confidence can always be hard to have, and it's hard to enter a room every day and to say, yeah, I'm smart, I believe in myself, I have great ideas, and that's okay too. It's okay to have those days where there's a little bit of doubt, but like Pablo said, that belief in yourself has to be sort of your overarching, just get you through it, and you have to remind yourself that every day. Someone told me recently, don't say no to yourself before someone else says no to you. So in other words, give yourself that chance. Go for it. I said on another panel, I was talking to some kids about imposter syndrome. So overcoming these feelings of maybe my idea is not great, or maybe I'm not good enough, or maybe I'm not strong enough, thinking about athletics. And I played volleyball for my whole life and struggled with feeling, some of that doubt. But you have to tell yourself that, as long as you're trying and you're putting yourself out there, that's still better than not doing it at all, right? So that effort and just putting yourself out there and being brave and having that moment of just believing in yourself is going to take you very, very far. And I'll tell you, those feelings don't just magically go away. It takes work every day to look in the mirror and say, I believe in you and you're great. And that's an exercise that I like to do every now and then before I go out, before I, go into a really important meeting or a presentation. We're adults and we feel that too. So you're not alone, but you can overcome it every day. And that's a great question. But Pablo, great advice. The only thing I disagree with is, the Knicks, I think they won 5 in a row. So I think you guys should root for the New York Knicks if you're not already. So that's my only point of disagreement.
I love that. That's great. Thank you both so much. And Carsen, you mentioned athletics, and we have quite a few students that are very curious about how much you can lift. And how'd you get into lifting?
Oh my gosh, I love that question so much. When I was training for volleyball, you gotta work your muscles. You gotta be strong to be able to play volleyball for a really long time. So as part of my training and just growing up, getting in the weight room and, getting familiar with the equipment in there. My dad would always train me. I spent a lot of time with my dad and my volleyball teammates. He would train us and make us lift weights. I remember one of my teammates, though, her name was Alyssa. She's one of my really good friends. She would tell my dad, I don't want to do that because I don't want my back to get big and I have to fit into my prom dress. I don't want to have too many muscles. But I will say, lifting weights will not make you bulky and big. It makes you strong and feel empowered. So if there's any interest in weightlifting, especially for girls, I really encourage you to get out there, and that will help with your confidence too. You lift a heavy weight, it feels amazing. And I've just always been involved in athletics since I was a little kid. So how much can I weigh? There's a lot of different lifts. I don't know if anyone has a specific question, but I guess to answer it very straightforwardly, there's a lift called a deadlift, right? You basically have a barbell on the ground and you pick it up. And so you put as many weights as you can on and just see how much you can stand up with the weight. Stand up all the way straight. Your hips are locked out. Your back is tight. Your core is braced. I can do 280 deadlift. So if anybody knows what deadlift is, that's how much I can do. I really enjoy it. It's a lot of fun for me. And if you have an interest in weightlifting and there's someone that can take you and show you the ropes, I really encourage you to try it. It's a lot of fun.
That's amazing.
That's crazy. That's
Wow.
amazing. Wow. Oh
Oh
my
my God.
goodness. That's very, very impressive. We have another question here from Hillcrest Elementary fourth graders, and they would like to know how will math be helpful in their futures? Pablo, maybe if you want to kick us off, and then Carsen.
You know, what I like about math is that you it math has an answer, right? You know, with writing creatively, there's a lot of interpretation that can happen, you know. And I in a part of me, because I didn't really study a lot of math, but I always appreciated that math had this definitive answer. And how it can help is that you like the way that math is almost absolute in how it and how it's presented. I think is very comforting to me, you know. And I think there's an idea like 1 + 1 is 2. That's it. Like there's no, you know, I mean, there's no other way around it. You know, you have one thing, and you add those things together, and those are two things now. And I there's something comforting about that. So I think learning math to also, if you're a creative like I am, understanding math can kind of feel grounding in a lot of ways. I get math, you know. I'll spend sometimes doing my budget for the year, which my wife thinks that I'm insane, because I'm like, okay, so let's do the budget for the year. She's like, you've done this 6 times already this year. How many more yearly budgets do you want to do in a year? But I like the idea of like what the numbers look like. Like, what do these numbers do? There's no like gray area between it. And I really appreciate that. So I think that like learning math can help you kind of feel grounded in that way.
I totally agree. That's a great answer. And you guys, I was actually just on a phone call for work before this, event here this afternoon. I was on a call with one of our engineers here at General Motors, and her work is amazing. It's super complex. She's an engineer, and what she works on is actually trying to calculate how much carbon exists in the world, but then also how much carbon might be, attributed to General Motors and our facilities and maybe some of our cars. So that's a big, big job and a huge concept, right? She's an engineer, but she had some of her presentation up on the screen for me, and she was showing me math. It was an Excel spreadsheet. And to get to some of the solutions that she wants to propose to the company, you guys, she has to do all these calculations to figure out what the best solutions are. So, math, I mean, right there in an example, is helping to fight climate change by helping us find these solutions. And you might not think that, when you're learning what you're learning right now in the fourth grade or, middle school or whatever it is, but just know that this foundation that you're setting right now, especially with math, with science, with technology, these topics and these subjects really, really help to solve some huge problems that we have right now, especially in the climate change space. So lots of calculations. It's going to be really important that we have even more people entering, high school and college and the working world, having a really good understanding. And one thing that one of my favorite calculus teachers in college told me, there's a lot of people, and Pablo, I said this too, like, I'm not a math person. I just don't like math. Like, it's not my thing, right? And then I had this teacher in college, like, this thing is math people. Like, it takes practice. And if you want to be good at it, you have to sit and you have to practice. You have to ask questions. You have to do it in your free time. Like, obviously that's a lot. That's a lot of extra work to get really good at something, but that applies to anything, right? But so if you feel like, hey, maybe math is not my strong suit, maybe take some practice, take some time to practice. And sorry if you hear squeaking. That's my puppy Champy playing with his toy next to me. But he's saying to just practice math. It's going to be really, really important for solving some of our big problems in the world.
That is such great advice. And I know that I don't necessarily have a traditional STEM job or a traditional math related job, but I still use math in my everyday life all the time, whether it's budgeting for work or for my personal life or whatever it may be. They still are those skills and abilities are still very, very relevant in your everyday life, regardless of what you choose to go into, right? So I think we have time for one last question. Carsen, if you want to start us off, how does your heritage and culture shape your viewpoint on STEM and sustainability?
Thanks for that, Sammy. I love that question. Like I said, everything that Pablo mentioned when he sort of opened us up here and started reading from his book, I feel like my culture, my Filipino culture and my heritage completely inspired me and is the reason that I have this deep sense of community and passion to help others. So when I think about sustainability, and I mentioned earlier a bunch of times impact, right? Our impact on the world. I connect, having an impact, that means knowing that you affect other people in your community and your world. So sustainability is really like that science side. And like I mentioned math earlier, but there's something on a deeper level that I feel like my family always instilled in me. And that is just that we have to care for each other. And to me, when I think about fighting climate change and, what Pablo's book is a lot about is, saving the bees, because it's to care for others. It's not a selfish act. And I feel like that's how I was raised. And I know my Lala, I have my Lala here, my grandma here for sleepovers once every other month. She stays with me and she always reminds me, that of our community and the impact that we have on each other, and how important it really is to take care of each other. So culture, heritage, it's everything to me, and it is everything to how I've gotten to this point in my life and in my career, really, which I think is a really cool thing. Thanks for that question.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you, Carsen, on that. There, you will be the claim that you have to your heritage or your culture will be questioned. You will be asked, why are you in this space? Why are you writing about the environment if you're Cuban? Why are you writing a story that has Spanish in it about the future? And I tell you this because that literally has been asked to me. First of all, never read Goodreads, but I happened to look at Goodreads and somebody put why does this book have so many random Spanish words in it? And it just reminded me that I am doing exactly what I should be doing by writing with Spanish, with this idea that these hermanas are inhabiting a world and they are the protagonists of the story that are trying to protect and save not just these bees, but their communities and their environment, and how they reestablish a sense of community within the world that they're living in, because these sisters que hablan español are allowed to be the protagonists of these kinds of stories. They're allowed to be to care about their environment. They're allowed to exist in the future, and so for me, I look at how I approach my own culture, my own background through the voices of my abuela and my ancestors, and how they bring through me this sort of task of write the heroes of our stories and place them into everyday world, into every situation imaginable. They can exist as climate scientists. They can exist as heroes trying to save the planet. They can exist as all of these things. And I look at Carsen. It's like just thinking about you and your Filipino heritage, and that we can exist in these positions, right? And make an impact and a difference in our world. And it's not an either or, like, oh, you're Filipino, you should stay in this little lane, like where you're supposed, oh, I'm Cuban, I should stay.
Absolutely.
We exist, right, to protect the same planet that we're all living on. And so whatever your identity is, whatever your heritage is, whatever your culture, whatever you feel you are inside, and the family that you claim and that you get to represent, you are allowed to live and make an impact however you want. Right? And that's the biggest lesson that I've learned throughout, and I'm never backing down. You know, because my abuela will whoop my butt with that chancla if I ever back down.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Little chancla that she'll come down from heaven and just be like, oye, me lo que te voy a decir. You better care about sustainability. Waka, waka. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you both so much. I know we just have about a minute here, so I'd like Jenna to come back and join us, but thank you both so much for sharing all of that. It was incredible to hear more about your experiences, so thank you again.